And so last week we learned what cryptography is, and Professor Baldwin told us that how data are stored in blocks in Bitcoin blockchain, and each block is connected to the previous block using the hash of the block. So I'll talk a bit about what Bitcoin mining is. So Bitcoin mining is basically finding a hash that fits a particular criteria. So here's an example. For example, let's say this is a Bitcoin block. And let's say I'm going to put some transactions here. So let's say Karleen sends 1 Bitcoin to Chinmay. So this block can have several transactions, right? And let's say Andrew also sends me a Bitcoin. So in the Bitcoin blockchain, you will not see the names. What you will see is the public key and the private key that Professor Baldwin talked about last time. Now, what a miner is trying to do is miner is trying to find a number, which is called as nonce, so such that it fits a certain criteria. So in this example, let's say if we say it should have 4 zeros in the front, then if I click the mine button, this program goes through several numbers, and then it stops when it finds a number 87653, so that the hash of the and the transactions I have put in this block have 40 in the front. So that's what basically mining is. So when you're talking about miners using electricity as much as one country, all they are trying to do is find a hash that meets certain criteria. So if you look at the latest Bitcoin block right now, so which is block number 731,718. And if you look at the hash of that block, it has about 19 or 20 leading zeros. And what is the nonce that they used in the last block? The nonce that they use is this number that you see right there. So this was a brief description of what mining is. All miners are trying to do is find a hash of the transactions along with a number so that it has a few leading zeros in the front. So I want to talk a bit about how transactions take place internationally. So this is a data from World Bank. So if you are going to transfer money from, let's say, South Africa, from South Africa to Nigeria, $200, and these are the different financial institutions you are using, you can see the amount of fees you need to pay, like in some cases as high as 35%. It takes 3 to 5 days to transfer that money. So this is a huge cost, and this is one thing blockchain is trying to solve. So right now, if you wanted to send money through Bitcoin blockchain, again, I'll show you an example. So I've connected my wallet to this computer, and my wallet looks something like this. So if you see this particular USB drive, that's what my wallet looks like. So my wallet is connected to this computer. And if I wanted to send money to, let's say, Andrew, I'll just put his public key here. And if I wanted to send $1, it cost me 55 cents. And it will take about 1 hour. And if I had more time, let's say if I wanted to take more time and pay less fee, I could change the fee to about 7 cents, and this transaction would take place in 4 hours. That doesn't matter how much money I transfer. Even if I transferred $1 million, which I don't have in my wallet, the fee would be still 7 cents. So you can see that blockchain is making transactions cheaper and faster. And as of now, there are 1.7 billion adults in this world that do not have a bank account. So what can they do to get a bank account? All they need to do is create a public key, private key pair, which is as easy as clicking a button. So we talked about public key, private key pair last week. So to create a private key, public key pair, all you have to do is click a button. So if you click this button random, I created a public key, private key pair. If I do it again, so you can see just now in front of you, I opened 5 bank accounts without the need of a bank. So if someone wanted to send money to me, all I do is I give them my public key. So just wanted to show you how Bitcoin can change this transactions and money, especially global transactions. It can make it faster and also cheaper. So some questions that people might ask is, how does Bitcoin derive its value? So I just wanted to touch upon that. So one is that if you say that Bitcoin is digital gold, which some people think it is, then you can like value the market cap of Bitcoin. So right now, market cap of gold is 12.5 trillion. and Bitcoin's market cap is $780 billion. And if you thought they should be the same, let's say some money should flow from physical gold to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's market cap should be $6 or $7 trillion. And then you can divide by number of Bitcoin in circulation, which is about 18 million, and you get one value of one Bitcoin. There's another model that people have come up with that's called a stock to flow model. And that model people have used to value precious commodities like gold and silver. So what you do is you look at the existing supply of gold or Bitcoin, and you look at how much new Bitcoin are being created every year. And then you come up with the number that how many years will it take to recreate the existing supply of Bitcoin or gold. And using that number, you find the price of Bitcoin or gold. So that model has done very well for gold and silver, and it's doing very well as far as Bitcoin is concerned as well. So this is what I want to talk a bit about Bitcoin. Now I want to move to more interesting blockchain, which is Ethereum. So all you can do with Bitcoin is you can do transactions. You can send coins to somebody. That's all you can do. But with Ethereum blockchain, what you can do is you can program transactions. So you can write a code with if and else loop. You can write when should a transaction take place, under what conditions. So I'll give you an example. Let's say Karleen and I want to place a bet on weather tomorrow, which is not easy to do in Rochester. And she says it's going to be sunny, and I say it will rain. So what we can do is we can bet $50, and we can both give $50 to Andrew. And Andrew will check the weather tomorrow. And if Karleen is right, she gets $100. Otherwise, I get $100. Now, the thing is, we need to now trust Andrew as well. What if he just runs away with the money? And so this gets more complex because we're involving a third party for a contract. So what we can do is we can write a smart contract on Ethereum blockchain where we both send $50 worth of Ether, and that blockchain has a program that if tomorrow's weather is sunny, Karleen gets the money. If tomorrow's weather is rainy, Chinmay gets the money. And then we don't have to worry about this contract getting failed because it is on a blockchain. And like Doug Baldwin talked last week, blockchain is immutable. So once a code has been written there, it's not going to change. So this idea of smart contract can be used in a lot of financial applications. So one of them being insurance. So AXA is an insurance company in Europe, and they came up with the smart contract for flight delay insurance. So usually what happens is when you buy insurance for travel, or let's say you buy insurance for health purposes, a lot of times you do not get paid for the claim that you file because there are some terms and conditions that you have not read. So what you can do is now you can create a smart contract on Ethereum blockchain, and the Ethereum blockchain, you deposit the money that you need to pay for a premium, and then the program in the Ethereum blockchain will contact an oracle, will look at the flight time, and based on how much your flight was delayed, it will pay you the claim for that. So this is one good example of what changes blockchain is going to bring in the financial world. Another example could be right now, if I have to borrow money or if I have to lend money, I have to use a bank, and bank ends up taking a chunk of the money. So what we can do is there are protocols written on Ethereum blockchain for lending and borrowing. So for example, if I had some US dollars and if I wanted to lend money, so I could convert them to US dollar coin, which are nothing but stable coins where value of one US dollar coin is pegged to one US dollar. So when I supply this money to borrowers, I get an interest of 2.42%, which is much more than the interest that the bank provides me. And people who are borrowing, they have to pay 3.91% interest. So again, here you can see that there's a smart contract here. I don't have to worry that I'll not get my money back. Whenever I want to withdraw my money back, I can do that along with the interest. So these are some applications I wanted to talk about, lending and borrowing. Then we can use it for derivatives. So right now we use financial exchanges for, let's say, oil contract. For price of oil, we use a derivative. And based on the price of oil, if we have a long position or a short position, we get paid. But all that can go on a blockchain. So blockchain can have the contract return for a derivatives contract, and we do not have this need for intermediaries there. So I think I'm getting close to my 15 minutes, but I just want to briefly talk about NFTs. So a lot of people are puzzled about why NFTs are going for so much money. For example, this particular picture of a crypto punk went for $17 million like 2 months ago. So why people are paying so much money? So again, like people pay for Picasso and they want to show off. They have this original piece of work, which is Picasso, and they want to show off. The same thing applies here. People want to own this. And now because this piece of art is on blockchain, and they can tell everybody in the world, they can send them their public key and everybody can verify that you own this. While if you have a Picasso painting, it's very hard to prove that's the original. So that's one purpose of NFT. But there are a lot more purposes. There are metaverse NFTs. So there are metaverses where you can buy a piece of land and you can build an office there. You can put an advertisement there. You can create a game on that metaverse and you can charge people money for playing a game there. And lastly, it is also possible to I want to give one more example. You can also have NFTs that are that you can use to claim that the physical asset that you have is a real asset. So for example, if you have a rare watch and you wanted to prove that it's real, you can have NFT associated with it. And when you sell the watch to somebody, you also sell that NFT to that person. So it's much easier to now keep a track of which rare asset is real and which one is not. So I just want to talk a bit about NFT, and these are my 5 NFTs that I own. So now I can send this my public key to anybody, and they can tell that I have this NFT. So, and also I just wanted to give you a link on where you can buy these NFTs. And there are a lot of ways to invest in blockchain technology. You can buy cryptocurrencies, but you can also buy stocks of companies that make these graphic processor units, or you can buy stocks of companies that invest in blockchain technology. So I think I'll stop there. It's about 15 minutes or so. I'll let Karleen and Andrew present their part.
So the title of my presentation today is It's Apocalyptic, but I'm actually not going to be talking entirely about how cryptocurrency is apocalyptic. This is primarily a reference to both the title of the series, Tales from the Crypt, and the concern about the dangers of cryptocurrency, but it's also referencing the larger kind of climate crisis and the potential for a disaster with the climate crisis, and putting cryptocurrency within that larger framework. So today, as you can tell, I'm going to be talking about the environment and the sustainability or the impact that cryptocurrency has on sustainability. So the first thing that I just want to provide some context, which both Doug Baldwin and Chinmay have given a great context to what cryptocurrency is, the technology behind it, as well as the financial side of it. I just wanted to highlight that when we're talking about the environmental repercussions of cryptocurrency, what we're really talking about is the mining process in particular. So, the depths of my metaphor making skills are really tested in my slides. So this first slide, it's alive. The rise of Bitcoin, the creation of Bitcoin in 2009, released as an open source software, and it becomes the first decentralized cryptocurrency. So this is a recent phenomenon. And Bitcoin mining is the process, as Chinmay explained, by which Bitcoins are entered into circulation. And it's also the way that the network confirms new transactions, which is a kind of critical component of the entire cryptocurrency. Oops, sorry about that. Did not mean to do that. Okay. So what we're talking about really when we're talking about the concerns that folks have about cryptocurrency, it is the amount of energy that is consumed by the mining process. So let's see. So for example, right, there have been a variety of studies now recently with concerns about the extensive energy consumption that Bitcoin in particular consumes. These studies range from taking place at the University of Cambridge. There's also some more recent studies published in the energy-focused journal Joule. But the consensus is that Bitcoin mining, and I keep in mind that I'm talking about Bitcoin specifically right now, Bitcoin mining is incredibly energy intensive. So Bitcoin mining operations worldwide now use energy at the rate of nearly 120 terawatt hours per year. So what does that mean? Well, the comparison is that this is actually about the annual domestic electricity consumption of the nation of Sweden. So Bitcoin transactions and mining alone are consuming the same amount of electricity as the entire country of Sweden. A single Bitcoin transaction uses about the same amount of power that the average American household consumes in a month. And that's roughly 1 million times more carbon emissions than a single Visa transaction. So we are talking about large scale energy consumption here, right? Now to put that in the larger context of global energy consumption as well as global carbon emissions. Oops. So, I mean, it's, again, my title, it's shocking, but Bitcoin, where does Bitcoin kind of fit in the larger global sphere of both energy consumption and also greenhouse gas emissions? So when we're talking about, again, when we're talking about Bitcoin mining, we're talking about the consumption of electricity. When we look at our overall concern for greenhouse gases, which are the major contributor to climate change, right, is greenhouse gas emissions. We're talking about 51 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted globally per year. Looking at sort of by sector, what we're really talking about is a variety of different sectors that contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. Electricity consumption is only one of those major sectors that emit greenhouse gas emissions. So manufacturing and infrastructure are actually the primary sector that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, with 31% of greenhouse gas emissions globally coming from the manufacturing and infrastructure sector. Electricity, however, and energy consumption is second, is the second highest contributor, with 27% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from the electricity sector. And then that's followed by agriculture, transportation, and refrigeration. And I would encourage all of you, if you are interested in learning more about these different sectors and what's being done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in these sectors, to visit the Project Drawdown website. It really does a great job of breaking down all of these greenhouse gas emissions, as well as talking about the different measures that are being undertaken in all of these sectors to try to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and get us down to a zero carbon economic system. So Bitcoin, by comparison, and again, I'm just talking about Bitcoin specifically, emits an estimated 22 to 22.9 million. So that's again out of the billion tons of greenhouse gases that are emitted globally per year. We're talking about 22 to 22.9 million metric tons of CO2 specifically. So again, the Project Drawdown website does a great job of breaking down greenhouse gas emissions, not just by sector, but also by the different greenhouse gases, because what we're talking about when we're talking about greenhouse gases is not just CO2, but also methane, chlorofluorocarbons, et cetera. So looking specifically just at CO2, Bitcoin emits an estimated 22 to 22.9 million metric tons of CO2 each year, which is equivalent to the energy use of use of 2.6 to 2.7 billion homes for 1 year. But overall, that's about 0.04% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And not just carbon dioxide specifically, but greenhouse gas emissions overall. A study in Joule, the journal Joule, estimated that this level sits between the levels produced by the nations of Jordan and Sri Lanka. So again, what we're really talking about here is electricity consumption on the first part. So Bitcoin as an industry on its own is consuming as much electricity as the country of Sweden. When we're talking about how that electricity consumption just generated by Bitcoin, the kinds of emissions that it's generating, the emissions are sitting between the levels of entire countries as well, between the nations of Jordan and Sri Lanka. So we're not talking about, like minuscule amounts here. These are huge comparisons that are being drawn emissions by Bitcoin and emissions by entire nation states. Okay. So it came from the deep. This is referencing the fact that why we're concerned about greenhouse gas emissions in Bitcoin is because when we're talking about energy or electricity consumption and its contribution to greenhouse gases globally, what we're really talking about is the burning of fossil fuels, right? So more than 2/3 of the world's electricity comes from fossil fuels. As you can see, I have a breakdown here provided by the Statistical Review of World Energy. Right now, most electricity comes from the burning of coal and of natural gas. So about 2/3 are from these fossil fuels, and it's the burning of fossil fuels that generates the CO2 emissions. Right. So when we're talking about, again, Bitcoin mining, what we're talking about is them drawing from electricity and where the sources of that electricity is coming from. Of course, nuclear is about 10%, and there are concerns, obviously, with the sustainability of nuclear energy, with the waste that it produces. But at this point, it is viewed as more of a clean energy simply because it does not emit greenhouse gases, right? So the concern with sustainability about nuclear energy is not its contribution to climate change, but its contribution or concerns about its sustainability and waste production. Okay, so then let's drill down further and think about what the implications that this has for Bitcoin in the long term and its sustainability. And so really what we're talking about then, and I have here again, it's mind bending that Bitcoin's impact is going to depend on where the Bitcoin mining facilities are getting their energy, right, and their electricity. So I have a couple of different examples here that are grounded right in New York State. And so the first example, and this is maybe an example that really raised the profile of concerns over Bitcoin's sustainability and the environmental repercussions of Bitcoin. It's the Greenidge Generating Station in Dresden, New York, which is located on Seneca Lake. It had been a retired coal plant, and in 2019, it was purchased by a private party. I believe it's called the Greenidge Corporation. It was purchased by a private party. It was converted to be a natural gas power plant. And now it is exclusively powering Bitcoin mining, right? So it's electricity that is being produced for no other reason than to support Bitcoin mining operations. Now, because this is a natural gas power plant, this is an example of a plant and mining operations that are concerning because they are emitting greenhouse gases, specifically CO2, right? And this is the concern that because Bitcoin uses so much energy that it is relying on these non-renewable or CO2 greenhouse gas emitting sources of energy. However, we have another example of Foundry, and I think Chinmay knows more about this organization than I do, but it is based in Rochester, and they do have operations in Fairport. Now, Fairport, New York. It's a suburb of Rochester. It's known famously for having really inexpensive energy, really inexpensive electricity. And that's because Fairport Electric has a longstanding history as a utilities company, but they draw most of their electricity from hydropower. So this is obviously an operation because it's getting its energy or its electricity from Fairport Electric, which is a utility company that is supported by hydropower, that this is considered a clean source of energy, right? So it's important to kind of keep the environmental impact of Bitcoin in this larger context, that what we're talking about is its energy consumption. And then what we're really talking about is where does that electricity and energy come from? How is it being created? Another environmental concern, though, with cryptocurrency in general, and Bitcoin specifically, is that these mining operations now are huge operations that involve tons of servers and electronic equipment to be able to process all of the mining computations that are required of Bitcoin transactions and entering the currency into the system. So, there's the demand for the most efficient hardware that's capable of processing the rapid computations per unit, because it is a competitive mining system. Miners are rewarded if they're able to identify those transactions. They're rewarded with Bitcoins themselves, right? So it is estimated that the Bitcoin network generates 11.5 kilotons of e-waste each year. The concern with this, of course, is that those electronic components often have toxic elements, things like mercury and other minerals and toxic chemicals that end up in the landfills if they're not properly recycled, and that leach into the soil and water supply. So Bitcoin is also, and the mining operations are also calling attention to these recycling practices, or lack thereof, and lack of regulation of where e-waste is disposed of. So the reason why I've been emphasizing so much that I was talking about Bitcoin specifically is because, as we know, Bitcoin is just one type of cryptocurrency. So it multiplied, right? In 2002, according to coinmarketcap.com, and Chinmay can tell me if that is a valuable resource or not, but there are nearly 10,000 different varieties of cryptocurrencies today, with new ones being added every day. So we've all heard of Bitcoin. Many of us have heard of Dogecoin. Many of us have maybe heard of Ethereum. I'm not sure how many of us have heard of the new recently added Milky Swap or Pays Payments. This is just a screenshot of coinmarketcap.com that is sort of illustrating all of the different varieties of cryptocurrencies in existence today. And so I'm highlighting this because some cryptocurrencies are inherently more energy efficient than Bitcoin. And why is this the case? Well, it's because of the different techniques that are used in the mining processes. Bitcoin relies on a proof of work system that involves a huge amount of calculations and thus processing power to produce a single token. But there are other ways of producing cryptocurrency tokens. So there is a proof of storage or proof of stake systems that use far less energy, as well as currencies that use a technology called block lattice, which doesn't require the extensive amount of energy used in mining. So I would leave it to Doug Baldwin or Chinmay to explain those technologies to me. That is not my area of expertise, but I just do want to call attention to the fact that there are more energy efficient varieties of cryptocurrency in existence. So to kind of conclude here, the end, or is it? Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are definitely here to stay. They are becoming important forms of currencies for a variety of different reasons, which Chinmay has already described and which Andrew is going to elaborate on in his presentation. But what I really wanted to emphasize, and this is why, the title of my talk today was "It's Apocalyptic," referencing the climate change crisis or the climate crisis. But I want to emphasize that cryptocurrency is not inherently bad for the environment, but it does highlight the greater need for a transition to clean energy, right? Because cryptocurrency has such high energy demands, what we really need to happen is a large scale transition to clean or renewable sources of energy. And this is regardless of whether we have cryptocurrency in our economic system or not. We need to be making these changes no matter what. It's the only way that we're going to get to a zero carbon economy. It also highlights the need for greater regulations on recycling and e-waste disposal. And then finally, I just want to note that not all cryptocurrency is created equal. So there is a website called LeafScore that ranks the 28 most sustainable cryptocurrencies for 2022. So for those of you that are interested in cryptocurrency, maybe investing in cryptocurrency, I would encourage you to check that out. They have an article that sort of describes the reasons why some are more sustainable than others, and they make some recommendations for ways that you could invest that would be a more sustainable, less high intensive energy consuming variety of cryptocurrency. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you to Paul for organizing this and for your kind introduction. And at this time, I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague in political science, Andrew Hart.
Oh, you're muted, Andrew.
Of course I am. You'd think I've been doing this for 2 years. I would have this down pat.
Happens to all of us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you to everyone for this. I'm actually learning quite a bit. Well, yeah, as everyone said, I'm sort of going to come here and talk a bit about the political side of things. The first thing to point out, I'd say though, is, however, there's very little empirical political science that studies cryptocurrency and the relationship between government and government policies, because, well, this is just sort of starting to happen, right? So we're still sort of in the land of informed speculation there than we are on sort of what you might call sort of solidified scientific knowledge. But I think we can still bring the tools that we have to bear to show some interesting things. And I would sort of concur with my co-panelists here that cryptocurrency, I do think, is here to stay. And I think we are absolutely witnessing a new chapter in the history of money, right? So today I'm going to sort of look at this from the slightly descriptive angle first. I want to ask one basic question first, which is what are countries doing in sort of big, broad regulation of cryptocurrency? And then I want to talk about a little bit about like what are ways governments are not just sort of limiting and regulating, but trying to harness it. And is this something we need to be concerned about potentially, right? And I'll just sort of highlight some examples from those. So with that, I think I will now share my screen. So, right, and I'd sort of highlight, when I talk about the, all right, you guys can see this? This is all good? All right, slide. Yeah, okay, cool. Boo. All right. Yeah, and I think some of the things I'll sort of talk about, they might sort of, when I started thinking about government control of cryptocurrency and things like that, it might undercut some of the original sort of intellectual foundations that drove the initial creation of cryptocurrency, which is that sort of, what is going on with my, sorry, pardon me, folks. I think I have a timing set on this that is causing me a problem. I will deal with that super quickly, hopefully. Hopefully I've done this. Goodness. All right. That sort of perhaps undercuts some of that sort of anarcho-libertarian sort of ideas that animates a lot of the cryptocurrency community and a lot of the excitement around this, right? The idea that this is something that people can use to escape from the boot of the government or from a sort of dictator, right? So let me share with you this first screen right here. I nabbed this picture. This is from a very recent report by the US's Congressional Research Service, which sort of tracks a lot of information on governments for people like me to follow. And they had this really nifty map that they put out just about a month ago. that provides you just a brief look at the legal status of cryptocurrency across the world, right? And sort of a rough marker here. What you can see is these are showing types of countries that have instituted like a sort of full legal ban, at least at some point, on cryptocurrency. Those are the sort of countries in orange there. And then the countries in blue are other ones who haven't officially banned crypto, but they have regulated it to such a degree, maybe in trying to limit things like dark web, terrorist financing, human trafficking, and things like that, that it is virtually unusable, right? It's very, very hard to use in that way. And so I point this out to you. I almost wish it was a classroom right now. I'd sort of say, hey, folks, what do these countries have in common here, right? And I would say, I think we point to a couple things, or really three things. The first is outright. This is especially when you look at countries who've done the absolute ban, the outright ban. I mean, China, Qatar, Oman, Morocco, Algeria, Iraq, Tunisia, and Bangladesh, right? So I guess the sort of first thing I'd point out here is well, these tend to be places that are somewhat less democratic than much of the other part of the world. And in fact, what you actually see is very, very, relatively speaking, light regulation of cryptocurrencies across the so-called developed West. Gary Gensler, the current head of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the regulatory body that oversees sort of financial exchanges and assets and things like that, call it the Wild West. But sort of developed countries are sort of at this point okay-ish with this, right? What we're really seeing is it is in fact the more authoritarian settings that are a little bit more controlling here, and this is not surprising, I would submit to you. One thing that we know about non-democracies is that they are much less open than their democratic counterparts to international finance and capital movements. They want to control the scarce resources that go into the economy. And we know this because dictatorships generally are less good at providing economic growth, or the conditions for economic growth across their citizenry. And for governments, right, this limits their ability to collect taxes. And it sort of, governments, I mean, I guess all governments to some extent, but especially more despotic ones, periodically are prone to expropriating assets from individuals, or at least from individuals or firms who are unconnected with the regime. So in that regard, crypto, to the extent that it could be a way for citizens to use this money as a store of value, then it might be something that dictators have a hard time getting at. And so in that regard, the authoritarian regimes, they want to put the kibosh on this as quickly as possible, right? And I think that's something we're starting to see out there. The second thing we're also seeing is that these countries tend to be developing, right, at various degrees, but they tend to be developing. And one of the things I sort of want to highlight here, and this might be a problem down the road, right? But developing countries over the last 40 or 50 years have had incredible problems harnessing international finance and the aspects of financial globalization to their benefit, or at least to the benefit that has often been purported as possible. In fact, international financial flows have been linked to increased risk of financial crisis across much of the world. And in fact, if you look at the world, there is rarely a region, developed or not developed, I guess you'd say, that hasn't experienced some kind of major crisis from the standard financial system. And so this crypto is sometimes said to be a way to move out of that system that might sort of create these risks over and over again and offer a new opportunity, maybe an opportunity to start fresh, right? And that's what we're seeing. The third thing I'd say about these countries is they tend to be in the Middle East and North Africa, at least the ones who do the outright bans. And for me, I don't know exactly why that is. I could speculate this might be some legacy of sort of an Arab Spring memory, that sort of concerns about a pro-democracy movement or uprising might lead some governments to be a little bit more controlling on this. And that's about where I could go there. And I think what we could sort of bring to bear there. I want to talk about some other aspects of this though, because sort of what it is that, let's put it this way. If there's a lot of money and power associated with cryptocurrency, potentially, well, governments aren't just going to try to limit it. They might try to get in on this a little bit, right? And we've started to see this in a really, really fascinating case of El Salvador. So it was last September, in 2021, El Salvador actually became the first country to adopt Bitcoin and use it as legal tender. I'll point out, it actually did this not through a truly democratic decision-making that went through El Salvador's sort of legislature and has sort of democratic consent. It came through executive decree, right? And the leader, who I will talk about just a bit in the next slide, used a lot of the arguments that Chinmay highlighted could benefit countries, right? So the remittance cost, the transaction costs associated with remittance payments are a major thing for El Salvador, right? Roughly almost more than a fifth of its GDP comes from remittance payments. So if you can increase the money that comes through that by reducing those transaction costs, you could significantly increase that amount, right? Additionally, as was mentioned, 70% of folks who live there are unbanked, right? So this produces a lot of potential opportunity there, right? And we saw, actually, interestingly, if you look over here at the pictures, there's actually a great CBS 60-minute news story from this past weekend on El Salvador. And they talk about this idea of Bitcoin Beach, right? It's the country that is sort of, about a few years ago, an anonymous Bitcoin donor gave 100,000 Bitcoin into this community and actually started to set up a little mini Bitcoin economy. And from this, right, this is the sort of the takeoff spot that has occurred, and sort of become a little bit of a hub of Bitcoin transactions, right? And that the leader sort of jumped on as a way to sort of move Bitcoin as more central into the economy. What I'll say is that this leader right here, Nayib Bukele, he's an interesting character. He's I guess you'd call a sort of center-right populist. He's a millennial, an outwardly millennial. He's 40. And the thing I'll say is he's talked a lot about, if I go back one slide, some of these problems in El Salvador, but also issues with his government previously actually adopting the US dollar as the El Salvadorian currency, right? This was done about 20 years ago to sort of tame inflation in El Salvador. And the idea here is that by adopting the US currency, you're essentially importing US monetary policy. You're essentially importing the credibility of the US Federal Reserve, which tries to target low inflation, right? So this is a way to sort of reset the economic value. So the problem, right, for some of these countries is that, well, it might perhaps help them in the inflation extent, but, well, the US Federal Reserve is not setting its interest rates and its monetary policy according to the needs of countries that adopt the US dollar. Is doing so based on the needs of the American economy. So it means that oftentimes countries that do this might not be getting exactly a monetary policy that is calibrated to their specific needs. So looking for other options becomes something more possible and more desirable. So enter Bukele, right? Now I'll say this, right? He at least outwardly seems to be one piece of a broader neo-populist authoritarian wave that is going on across much of the world. He's starting to solidify power within the executive branch, undermining legislatures and judiciaries and packing courts in the way that many sort of dictators have tried to do over the years. Recently sort of expanded term limits, and did so, it has sort of pushed his legislative agenda through sort of heavy-handed ways. There's a sort of famous example where he actually had stormed parliament with armed soldiers from the military to actually intimidate the lawmakers to push through his budget, right? So he advertises this and sort of markets himself as the quote-unquote coolest dictator in the world. He's the millennial dictator who wants to bring Bitcoin, right? And I guess my point here is that, people who are nervous about this, they think of two problems, right? The first is kind of more specific to the condition of El Salvador and maybe this sort of specifically charismatic leader. It's a potential way to distract from other problems. El Salvador has incredible problems with crime, and right now people are talking about that less, right? So there is a distractive element. The bigger thing I want to raise, right, is the concerns that Bitcoin could be used as a way for leaders who are engaging in human rights abuses to escape sanctions, right? And can you use Bitcoin to escape sanctions? So this is one of the things I want to point out. And we don't know this for sure. It's not an emergent pattern, but it is an emerging pattern. And it's been reported on by a number of outlets, including Forbes and Business Insider. But here's the thing we're starting to see, which is a little bit worrying, right? The expectation was that, has always been sort of that as emerging markets would face distress, right? Individuals would you'd see heightened demand for Bitcoin because people in those markets would move their assets into Bitcoin for reasons of safety, right? And so therefore you would see prices of Bitcoin go up as economic problems in key developing countries emerged as well, right? And we saw that early on. But about 3 years ago, we started to see this change in trends, right? Where you're starting to see a little bit of a different dynamic. And the concern here is I can't say this is happening. We don't have quote unquote smoking gun evidence. This is too invisible, right? But we're starting to see patterns that are consistent with this, right? Which is now that emerging market distress and especially currency distress is actually associated with selling of Bitcoin, right? And you can see this in really precise examples of Turkey and the Turkish government, the specific points of distress that they have seen, and then changes in the value of Bitcoin, right? And so what we're starting to see in this pattern is fluctuations of the Bitcoin currency that correlate with these problems in a way that suggests that governments have been sort of surreptitiously collecting Bitcoins and then selling them off when they're really cash strapped, perhaps in ways to undermine sanctions. Right now, this is whether sanctions are appropriate or is a separate question. But the point I simply want to raise here is do we really want governments collecting Bitcoin and using it to sort of bail themselves out when they find themselves in some kind of economic problem or some kind of political problem? And I would raise that as an issue. And the final thing I just want to highlight here, I don't quite know how to fit this in, right? But one of the things we're also seeing around the world is governments starting to issue their own digital currencies, right? This is a very, very sort of fascinating story from the New York Times about a year or so ago called The Coder and the Dictator, this is Gabriel Iglesias. He's a young techie, very cryptocurrency, big advocate in Venezuela, who was basically scared by the government into developing a plan to develop a cryptocurrency for them. He of course became very upset at the way this was hijacked by the forces of a sort of increasingly authoritarian government, right? But what we're starting to see here is the perversion of this initial blockchain idea, right? And the idea that when governments do this, they appear to be linking it to some value, right? Sort of not purely within this blockchain economy here. And so Venezuela is sort of just linking this to oil, right? And the concern is that what this then does is it enables a digital currency, it enable governments, especially a repressive government, much more room to monitor economies in ways that enable them to control and potentially repress, right? Now, this is a perversion of cryptocurrency. I would submit that, but it is a step that governments are doing to try to solidify their control. And so with that, I will stop there because I hope that raises some issues about the political side of this. So thank you.